So it's a real pleasure today to be chatting to Michelle Partington about her journey from PTSD to recovery. Michelle was one of the first female RAF paramedics to serve on the front line in Afghanistan. After 2 tours, she was diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Her story is one of bravery and resilience as she battled to rebuild her life. She is now driven by challenges, having represented Great Britain at the Invictus Games, and is now planning to row across the Atlantic, hopefully later this year. Michelle won a special award for overcoming adversity and also Woman of the Year at the 2018 Women in Defence Awards. Today, she's an excellent ambassador, coach, and mentor, raising awareness of mental health issues within the workplace. So a very warm welcome to you, Michelle.
Okay.
So I'd like to start off by perhaps you telling us a bit about your career within the RAF and what it was like being a female paramedic in Afghanistan.
I joined at the age of 19 and I was very naive, didn't know anybody, didn't know what to do, and had trust issues, all sorts of stuff. So to be thrust into a room of almost 30 other women was really strange, and you quickly have to learn to muck in. And I got to the rank of sergeant and then decided to go for my commission, which I didn't think was possible because my qualifications weren't great. But I battled through that and got through it and ended up as a commissioned officer, running, and did 23 years in the RAF before I was medically discharged. I did 3 tours of Afghan, 1 in Bahrain and 1 in the Falklands, which were great tours, the Bahrain and the Falkland tours. But then shock as I did my first tour. I was the first female to go out with the RAF regiment out on the ground in Afghanistan, doing foot patrols, compound checks, vehicle checkpoints and searches. And that was a massive eye-opener. And they said that a woman couldn't do that job, but here we are on Women's International Day, and you know, we can do the job. And I proved that, and many women beyond me have proved that as well. And yeah, it was a scary prospect initially, but it was scary for most of the lads that had never been out there before as well. So, you know, we were all in the same boat. And then sadly, when I got back, I ended up on the medical emergency response team, which was a lot more difficult tour because we were going out in the helicopters to the point of wounding and picking up either 1, 2 or several casualties. And they were in all sorts of states, you know. And if I remember halfway through the first tour that if we got a casualty with 1 single below knee amputation, we all took a sigh of relief because it was easy for us to deal with. And that must sound really random, but compared to the injuries and stuff that a lot of the casualties sustained, it was horrid. And knowing that there was children in the mix as well, I found that really quite difficult. And the second tour was where I initially crashed and burned. I got through the tour, I don't know how I did, but then I crashed and burned when I got back because, you know, you're seeing people with blast injuries, legs, you know, and arms blown off. You're seeing gaps everywhere and people, gunshot wounds to the neck and under the armpit that you've got no chance of doing anything with. And a lot of the casualties, unfortunately, everything that we did to try and save their life was futile because they were never going to survive. And to carry that and then also pick up insurgents was quite difficult because we had to pick up anybody. The casualties were there, we picked them up, but it was really hard. And I remember one particular shout where 5 British soldiers were shot dead by an Afghan National Army person who was working with them. So we picked up the 5 casualties who subsequently all passed away, and then we then had to go and pick him up because he was injured as well, and I found that really difficult mentally. And then this is where I had to separate. This is a machine that needs fixing. This is a person that could give us some intelligence, etc. And that's how I had to do it, because we don't discriminate, but it's still hard when you've just seen 5 people killed by an individual and you then have to save their life as well. So it was mentally challenging as well as physically challenging on those tours.
When did you first start to realise that you might have PTSD, and what were the warning signs for you, and what was the ultimate trigger point?
So when I got past the first Merc tour, I got home, and I wasn't going out as much. I tended to want to stay in a lot more. I wasn't as outgoing as I used to be. But I just put that down to the fact that it was just an adjustment disorder, having come back from such a high intense situation. But then I got sent out again. Within 8 months, I was back in Afghan, and I didn't really have time to think about it or deal with any underlying thing that was going on. But halfway through the second tour, so when we come off the helicopter, we have to make our weapons ready, and we come under fire almost straight away. And I used to dread that. But then I remembered halfway through the second tour thinking, do you know what? I'm not scared anymore, because if I got shot or killed, it meant that I didn't have to be in that living nightmare anymore. And that's when I knew that something was desperately wrong. But I didn't open up to anybody, because we were a small, slick team that was working well, and I didn't want them to have to worry about me as well as having to worry about their own jobs. So I just went on autopilot, did what I needed to do, got home, tried to work. My moods were horrific. I was either really, really angry or really, really low, and there wasn't very much in between, and they were extremes of moods. And my fiance in the end ended up leaving me. I ended up losing my home, that was my sanctuary, because I was just in a mess. I couldn't think about anything, I couldn't work, and I was medically discharged in the end. And I was in a really, really dark place. I can't remember most of the 2 years where I was in a dark place. I just can't remember it at all. So
Did you not feel able to talk to your employers or colleagues about it?
unfortunately not then, because when you're out in Afghan, you know, it's a scary place, and it's a scary job as it is. And what I didn't want to put the burden on them. And what the other thing that would happen is they would have sent me home, and somebody else would have had to come at very short notice, leaving their families. And then if something had happened to them out there, I would have carried that as well. And it was just a whole host of things which stopped me from doing that. And then when I got back to the UK, I tried to, but it just, I wouldn't say it fell on deaf ears. It was just that everyone was in such stress situation due to the huge amount of work that was there, that work was the priority. And it was only somebody, it was actually a boss that I used to work for, that noticed it in me and said, you need to go and get some help. So I did, and that's when I got signed off. And even the day I got signed off, unfortunately, my boss said, okay, we'll have to wait until I get back from the gym, because it's lunch hour and I'm going to circuits. And you know, I was at the worst place of my life, about to tell somebody for the first time about the diagnosis, and I had to wait for them to finish their circuit session.
Unbelievable.
So, yeah.
Has the culture changed at all?
Oh yeah. Without doubt, in the military now things are a lot better. Certainly, more so. I've seen, certainly all over Twitter and stuff, I've seen in the army. Actually, the government have now just set up Courage, which is supporting people once they leave the services. But actually, there's a lot of support in the services, medically wise. There's a lot of support, but unfortunately, I think it's down to the individuals. You know, you've got all the information there. I mean, I should have had trim sessions when I got back, and that didn't happen. But I think it's more down to the individual than the company, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, most companies that I've come across, and most military personnel that I come across, understand it now. But pressures of work and certain other things, sometimes individuals forget about the person, and all they want is information on the job itself. So
you talked about hitting rock bottom. I mean, how did you manage to resurface from that?
In the end, I received a letter, and I don't even know why I opened this letter, because I hadn't opened mail for a long time. There's a lot of mail there, and I opened it. It was a brown envelope, and I opened it, and it was from SAFA, which is a military charity, saying that they're taking me off their books. And I didn't realize I was on their books. And I was literally on my knees emailing them back saying, please don't take me off your books, I'm desperate. And the day after, somebody was on my doorstep from SAFA. And there's a lovely lady called Eva who got me into the NHS, because I did try and go through the NHS, but because I was having panic attacks every time I left my front door, I couldn't get to the appointments. And after 2, people know that sadly you're dropped off the list and you go back to the bottom again. So she got me back into therapy, and got me in a better place.
To what extent do you think PTSD is viewed as a male soldier's condition rather than a female one? And what have you done to combat that?
So they said, oh, well, you can't initially, and there's a lot of people said this, oh, well, it's not really that bad, is it? Because you've not been on the front line like most of the males have and stuff. And actually, I've got closer to certain situations and been under fire than most males that are out in Afghanistan have been. And it is viewed as PTSD, but also there's a negative view of, well, if you've got PTSD, you're going to be drunk, you're going to be on drugs, you're going to be homeless, you're going to be this, that, and the other. And to be honest, it's not. PTSD is not just a military illness. PTSD is a diagnosis of any traumatic event or an accumulation of traumatic events. And this is where, with my company, I sort of educate people a lot better that anybody can get a diagnosis of PTSD. Women, doing childbirth or, any attack, if you've been mugged or various other things, domestic violence, you could be PTSD. I would say my brother-in-law's got PTSD because he's just lost his daughter suddenly to cancer. Anybody, if they've had a traumatic event, can be diagnosed as PTSD, and it isn't just a military condition.
Having served for 23 years, I just wonder how you managed to cope without that camaraderie. I mean, you've been so used to have loads of people around you the whole time, and then suddenly you've got to adapt to civilian life. I mean, how has that affected your recovery?
Well, initially, isolation was good for me. So it didn't affect it at all. I was happy to be on my own. I was happy doing my own thing. So that had not a problem. But actually, when you realize that the people you want to turn to the most are not there anymore, that's a sudden loss. And I ended up grieving for the loss of my career, not for the job, but for the people. But I've been very privileged to be able to keep hold of quite a lot of the friendships that I made there. And I kind of still have that in a way now. And I now go on military bases where I didn't before. I was too scared to go back on them. So yeah, I've still got that. And bizarrely, I'm working with a few people in the military now. So
self-care is so important to maintaining good mental well-being. So I just wondered how much of your recovery was down to yourself and your own self-care, and how much was down to the clinical support you received.
I think the majority of recovery for any illness, it has to be down to the individual. They have to want to get better. And that's the first thing. And then, even therapy was only once a week for me. There's another 6 days in the week where you have to keep going yourself. And, you have to practice the skills that you taught through therapy. You have to practice pausing. And that's one thing for me, is a pause for me is really important. And just taking stock of where you are that day, realizing maybe that it's not going to be a good day, and ride it out. So most illnesses have to be down to the individual. You have to want to get better, and then you have to put things into practice to make it better. And it's hard because some days you just want to hide under the duvet. But I learned the hard way that isn't practical, and the long-term solution isn't hiding away from it. You have to face your illness, and you have to work with people that are trying to help you, and then help yourself.
Well, I mean, what kind of things do you do now? I mean, do you do mindfulness, or what helps you the most now?
Do I can't shut off to mindfulness. It works for a lot of people, but I just can't, because my head's always too busy.
I know the feeling.
I go walking. I do a little bit of exercise still, but for me, walking is just, and I walk for miles, just to clear my head, and I don't have to think about anything. I put an audiobook on, or I put some music on, and I'm able to switch off by going walking and just looking at nature, just looking at what's around us. And I think we forget that sometimes. And just being able to, I mean, unfortunately there's been a lot of bad weather, but that hasn't stopped me, because at the end of the day, skin's waterproof. You can just go out there. You still need the fresh air, and you need an escape. And that safe place for me is the Peak District. I love the Peak District. And this last 12 months, I haven't been able to go there. But I've still been able to go walking. So that's been a good thing.
Wonderful. I definitely share that. There's been a lot of talk out there about how people's mental health has been drastically affected by working remotely. Pandemic. I just wondered, perhaps you could give us 3 pieces of advice for employers, ways they can rebuild their staff resilience as we return to normality, or try and return to normality. The first thing is to realize that their staff, the staff that fear coming back, it is a real fear. It's the anxiety of stepping back through that door again, say, if you like, because
adjusting to working from home was bad enough. You know, people trying to get into routines, working longer hours than they used to do because they didn't know when to shut down, or, you know, they've had to homeschool and things. So there's going to be a massive shift, and they've got to be patient with each individual and not look at just, right, this section needs to come back. They have to look at each individual coming back to work, which is harder, but they're worth the investment. If you want them back in work, you know, it's worth the investment. So realize that their fear is real, then make sure you put steps into place to allow them to come back at their own pace, and maybe have this flexible working now, where if they're used to working from home now, and actually a lot of people have been quite more productive working from home, then maybe consider, is that an option for maybe half the week working from home and half the week working here? But I certainly think employment assistance programs are going to come to the front here, because when I've been talking to companies, there's been a very low uptake on support to employment assistance programs. But I think now, and I know so because I've spoken to same few companies who said there's been a huge uptake in support from the employment assistance programs, and just allow them that space to get used to adjusting to another new normal.
I read somewhere that you're a self-confessed non-sports person. So
Yeah.
I just wondered, how on earth have you got round to representing Great Britain in rowing and weightlifting?
So I hated sport. And I even won an award when I went for my commissioning for always coming last, because I just, it's a true story. It's a true story. For showing true grit and determination and not giving up. But I hated it. I hated running. I hated lifting. I hated it. And I still don't like running, but I do it because I know how important it is for my health. But then during my recovery, Invictus Games got in touch, because I was linked with Help for Heroes, Hidden Wounds, and they got in touch, and they sent an email around, and it said, be an athlete, come and join us in the Invictus Games. And I deleted it. I laughed my head off, deleted it. And twice I deleted the email. And then the third time, in bold, it said, you do not need to be an athlete. So I thought, I might give it a go then. And the point of the Invictus Games was for people to get that camaraderie back, be with other people again that were in the same boat as you, and try and get some recovery back into your life. So I thought, well, I'll give it a go. And I went to some of the camps, and I was rubbish. I chose rowing because it was a sit-down job, right? Anybody that's done any indoor rowing, it's horrific. And I was throwing up. Every single session we had, I was throwing up. And then powerlifting, I wasn't so bad at powerlifting. But again, it was, you know, you could lie down. So for me, they were two easy sports, but they weren't. And yeah, I got accepted into the team for some bizarre reason. I think it's because even then I didn't stop, and I was helping other people as well on the camps as well, and talking to them about my illness and how they can best, and we were sharing coping mechanisms and things, because I think that's important as well. And yeah, I ended up in Toronto competing on a world stage, and I still don't believe it. I still can't believe that I did it now. And I remember a BBC reporter saying to me when I came off the powerlifting, so where do you think you've come? And I said, you know what, I really don't care. The fact that I got up on that platform was enough of a medal win for me. And that was an honest account of my games, is that I knew I was never going to be a medal winner, but for me it was about getting up there and doing it. And I got the fire back in my belly that I needed to focus and find a purpose in life again. And that was the whole point of the games, and it worked.
Yeah, I was going to ask you how taking on these challenges has helped your recovery.
Yeah, it got me the fire back in the belly that I needed. So the first thing that it did was, because the training was so rigorous, I had to eat properly, because I was living off peanut butter on toast, which incidentally is really nice, but not healthy. And you know, so I was living off that and biscuits, because I just couldn't be bothered cooking. I had no purpose, I had no routine, I had nothing about me. And having to turn up to training camps, having to perform and get through the training, and just having that goal of, oh, I could get to the games here, I could be picked, and just having little small goals to achieve. And they have to be small goals, because if you set yourself a massive goal when your head's really not in it and you don't achieve it, then you drop even more. So I had small goals, and all I wanted to do for each training camp and each test was to be better than I was before. And I did each time, and that was good for me. So these little goals, and I still set myself goals today, just give you that oomph and that desire to move forward.
So you're not expecting, I mean, not everybody can, you know, row the Atlantic or, you know,
No.
power lift. So, I mean, what advice would you give to people in, you know, in terms of sort of trying to recover by taking on challenges?
I think, you know, put yourself outside of your comfort zone, because that's where your strength and your resilience builds. You know, staying within your comfort zone is good, but where do you achieve there? You know, all you've achieved is the same thing that you do every day. So step outside, a little step outside your comfort zone, not a massive one, because you may not achieve it, or you're just going to be anxious every day thinking about and worrying about it. So, you know, step out a little bit. And do you know what? If you don't achieve it, then that's okay, because you stepped out, and that's the important bit, is you made that step. And I would say that to anybody. And then the day after, make that step again, or a week after, make that step again. Prepare, adjust, and make that step again, and you will get there. But the best thing I would say to anybody is don't give up on it.
How is your experience affecting you today? I mean, I assume that it's just never going to go away. So I just wondered what your coping mechanisms are.
So I know most of my triggers now. So, and I don't avoid them anymore, which is what I used to do. I have coping mechanisms in place to deal with and manage the majority of them, but there are still going to be things that come up and bite you in the bum, and you're going to have a bad day still. But I accept that now and I ride it out, because it isn't going to go away, and you trying to fight it is just going to make it worse. So, you know, it's very rare now that I have a bad day, but when I do, I'll put a box set on, and that's me. That's it. And people know that, my family know that, and that's fine. But the majority of the time, I know how to manage my illness better. And I was told I'd never work again because of my diagnosis. People wouldn't employ me, and I did attempt to get jobs. And in the end, obviously, I set up my own business, which gives me the flexibility that if I have a bad day, I can have a bad day, because I'm not upsetting or letting anybody else down. It's just myself. So that's what I'm doing.
But finally, I mean, I'm really interested in the challenges that you've done. So what's next for you?
Hopefully we're in Atlantic, but I think we're going to have to delay it this year because we've not been able to hold any of the events, the fundraising events. So we're plotting it in for next year now, and that's a challenge. And for me, it's like, what? But and they're like, isolation, and there's only 2 of you, but I don't mind a bit of isolation. I don't mind at all now. But it's, for me, it's to show and prove to myself, because it's going to be more of a mental battle than a physical battle. So that for me shows that I'm another step forward, and I've just moved a further step forward in my career, because I lost my paramedic registration, and I believed that one day I would get it back, and last week I was awarded it.
Oh, wonderful.
So you can achieve anything, even when they say that you can't. So you've just got to give it a go. You've got to go for it. And yeah, and that's why I'm going for the Atlantic.
Okay.
I'm coming for you.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much, Michelle.
Absolute pleasure.
I mean, your story is just so moving and inspiring, and you have just such sheer determination. And I think there's some great messages for us all to take back in terms of how we can build our own resilience and that of our colleagues. So thank you so much for your time, and I hope people still have some questions. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Pleasure.